Great, Rain said and looked at her watch. Well, guys, it's about that time. Have a good one. She walked out the door and across the gravel parking lot. Rhett walked up beside her. You want to stop at the latch string later tonight? He said. Maybe around 9? Rhett, she started, but he put a hand on her arm and they stopped. Just as friends, I promise. You're a cool chick. I like you. You're fun and interesting and pretty, but I can overlook all that. Come on, just hang out for a while. I guarantee you won't regret it. Rain looked at him. He was a nice guy, and they got along well. If they weren't working together, she probably would have been interested in starting something. But they did work together, and ever since the law office fiasco she'd experienced just before working for the Schenck brothers, she'd promised herself that she'd never get involved with a coworker. She sighed and looked at the sky. Okay, I'll come, but only as friends, okay? She poked at his chest, and he smiled. Okay, he nodded his head. Okay, as he turned and walked away, still smiling. Rain licked her lips and tasted the dried salt of her own sweat. She looked up at a jet passing overhead, the rush of the engines temporarily drowning out everything else. It would be several hours before sunset. She wondered if the man in her garden would appear again, what she would do if he did. What if he showed up and she had to leave to meet Rhett at the latch string? Would she just walk out the front door with the mystery man standing behind her house? Should she call the police if he showed up again? Maybe she should call Rhett and cancel if the man showed up. So, you're going out with Rhett? Connie, the receptionist for the small front office, was walking out across the parking lot toward her car. Rain thought Connie must have overheard the two of them talking. Not that it was the first time she'd eavesdropped on Rain's conversations with Rhett. Just as friends, Rain insisted, sounding unconvincing even to herself. Well, obviously, Connie said sarcastically, waving a hand dismissively and brushing a few bottle-blonde locks from her face, a condescending smile on her lips. Her pink lipstick was wearing off in the middle, leaving the edges darker. I mean, you're hardly his type, are you? I don't think he goes for tomboys. She patted her forehead with the back of her hand and held her blonde hair up off her neck. How do you guys stand it out here all day? She asked. Well, we don't wear nylons for one. Rain looked down at Connie's feet. She was wearing high-heeled sandals with her yellow sundress. Connie smiled and laughed. God, you're so funny, she said, fanning herself. Rain resisted a strong urge to step on her pretty little panicured toes as she walked past to the small greenhouse. Behind her, she heard Connie walk toward her car, stumble on the gravel in her heels, and mutter a curse. Somehow, the day seemed a little brighter. Rain punched out, replacing her card in the rack next to the others, and walked to her car, gravel crunching beneath her feet. On the drive home, she stopped at a graveyard near her neighborhood. It was old, with thin, rounded gray and white headstones. Their surfaces were rough, worn, and pocketed. Dark patches of mildew and moss colored the stones. Many of them bore the remnants of a bas-relief hand pointing to the sky, a symbol of the hope of heaven for the deceased. Some had been tipped over or had fallen, and lay like books that had toppled from a shelf. She parked Roger beneath a tall cedar tree, stepped out, and took a deep breath. Cemeteries had always been alluring to her. Even as a child, she hadn't been afraid of them. They held a sense of peace for her, of regeneration. Often, if she felt tapped out, drained, or stressed, she would seek a cemetery and take refuge in it. She sat down by a broad rectangular grave. The white stone, still standing, was discolored, the name rendered long unreadable by years of weather and neglect. She leaned back and closed her eyes. Grass prickled against her palms. In high school, she had sometimes slept in this very graveyard. It was set back from the road and visited only by pranksters and teenagers who usually made enough noise to wake her before they drew too near. One night, when she was 16, she'd fallen asleep beneath a tall statue of an angel set in the back corner of the graveyard. She'd heard a group of kids arrive, but they stayed toward the front of the cemetery. One of them, though, had ventured away from the others. She heard him walking and thought that if she stayed very still he would pass her by, but he hadn't. He'd come up to her, shining his flashlight about, and seen her. She'd pretended to be asleep, planning her defense if he tried to touch her, but he simply stood for a while and watched her before he went back to the others. The angel stood still in the same spot, and Rain looked over at its face, rendered featureless by time.